There is someone in your life who is wrong about almost everything. They speak with complete confidence. They never hesitate. They never say, "I'm not sure," or "I might be missing something." They walk into rooms like they already know the answer to every question in it. And the strange part is, they genuinely believe they do. You have probably spent time wondering how a person can be that wrong and that confident simultaneously. It seems like those two things should cancel each other out. Like at some point, the wrongness should catch up with the confidence and collapse it. It doesn't. And in 1999, two psychologists finally figured out why. The story starts in 1995 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A man named MacArthur Wheeler robbed two banks in broad daylight. No disguise, no mask. He walked straight up to the tellers, handed over his notes, took the money, and left. He was arrested the same night. When police showed him the surveillance footage, he was genuinely confused. He pointed at the screen and said he didn't understand. He had rubbed lemon juice on his face before walking in. He believed that lemon juice, which can be used as invisible ink, would make his face invisible to cameras. He wasn't on drugs. He wasn't having a mental episode. He had simply read somewhere that lemon juice could make things disappear on paper and concluded, with complete confidence, that the same logic applied to his own face on camera. The police were baffled. But a psychologist named David Dunning at Cornell University was fascinated. Dunning read about Wheeler in a newspaper and immediately called his graduate student Dunning-Kruger into his office. The question he wanted to answer was simple. How does a person become that wrong about something while feeling that certain? Because here is the thing about MacArthur Wheeler that is easy to miss. He didn't walk into those banks hoping he wouldn't get caught. He walked in believing he wouldn't. There was no anxiety, no hesitation. He was operating from a position of genuine confidence built on a foundation of genuine ignorance. And Dunning suspected this wasn't unique to one bank robber in Pittsburgh. He and Kruger ran a series of experiments at Cornell. They tested students on logical reasoning, grammar, and the ability to identify what was and wasn't funny in a set of jokes. All three were areas where performance could be objectively measured. Then they asked each student to estimate how well they had done. The results were published in 1999 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. What they found changed the way we understand human intelligence. The students who performed worst on every single test were the most confident about their performance. Not slightly more confident, dramatically more confident. Students who scored in the bottom 12% consistently estimated that they had performed in the top 60%. They didn't just overestimate. They overestimated by a margin that should have been impossible without some awareness of how badly they had done. But they had no such awareness. That was the point. Dunning and Kruger identified something that sounds almost paradoxical. The skills required to recognize a good answer are the same skills required to produce one. If you don't know enough about logic to reason correctly, you also don't know enough about logic to recognize when your reasoning is wrong. The incompetence hides itself. Think about what that actually means for a second. If you have never learned to cook properly, you probably don't know what properly cooked food tastes like, so your terrible cooking tastes fine to you. The deficiency in your skill is also a deficiency in your ability to notice the deficiency. Dunning called this a double burden. You perform badly, and you have no mechanism for detecting that you performed badly, so you walk away from every failure feeling like a success. But here is where it gets even stranger, because Dunning and Kruger didn't just find that incompetent people were overconfident. They found something equally disturbing on the other end. The students who performed best on the tests consistently underestimated their performance. The people who were genuinely skilled, who reasoned clearly and wrote correctly and identified good jokes accurately, assumed that what came easily to them came easily to everyone. They thought they had performed around average. They had no sense of how far above average they actually were. So you get this bizarre curve. At the bottom, people who know almost nothing feel like they know everything. At the top, people who know a great deal quietly assume that everyone else knows just as much. The most confident people in any room are often the least qualified to be there, and the most qualified people in any room are often the quietest, because they are the only ones fully aware of how much they still don't know. You have probably felt this yourself. Think about the first time you learned something new. A language, an instrument, a sport. In the very beginning, before you knew enough to know what you didn't know, There was probably a window where you felt like you were getting it, maybe even getting it faster than most people do. Then you learned a little more, and suddenly it got harder. Not because you were getting worse, but because you were becoming aware for the first time of the actual size of the thing you were trying to learn. Psychologists sometimes call this the valley of despair, the point where you know just enough to see how much you don't know yet. And it feels worse than knowing nothing, because at least when you knew nothing, you felt fine. The people who never fall into that valley are the ones who stopped learning before they reached it. They built their confidence on the first few things they picked up and walked away before the picture got complicated. And those are usually the loudest people in any conversation about that topic. Dunning and Kruger weren't the first people to notice this pattern. They just gave it a name and proved it. Bertrand Russell wrote in 1933 that the trouble with the world is that the stupid are cocksure, while the intelligent are full of doubt. Charles Darwin wrote almost the same thing 50 years before that. Shakespeare wrote something remarkably close 400 years before Darwin. People have been observing this pattern for as long as there have been people to observe. But what Dunning and Kruger added was the mechanism. The reason it happens isn't that stupid people are arrogant by nature. It is that the metacognitive ability required to evaluate your own performance accurately is itself a skill that has to be learned. And if you haven't learned it, you have no way of knowing you haven't learned it. The research has held up. It has been replicated in medical settings, where doctors who know less about a procedure consistently rate their own competence higher than doctors who know more. It has been replicated in political knowledge studies, where people with the least accurate understanding of policy consistently rate themselves the most informed. It has been replicated in driving studies, in financial literacy studies, in studies of debate performance. The pattern appears everywhere humans are asked to evaluate themselves against a standard they cannot fully perceive, which raises a question worth sitting with. If incompetence prevents people from recognizing their own incompetence, how do you know you are not one of them right now? How does anyone know? Dunning himself said the answer is unsatisfying but honest. You can't fully see your own blind spots. That's what makes them blind spots. What you can do is stay genuinely curious, keep learning past the point where things feel comfortable, and pay specific attention to the moments when you feel most certain. Because certainty, it turns out, is not a sign that you are right. Sometimes it is a sign that you don't yet know enough to know you're wrong. The Dunning-Kruger effect does not just apply to people you disagree with. It does not only live in the person across the room whose confidence annoys you. Research shows that all humans are susceptible to it in different domains. The surgeon who is brilliant at one procedure can be completely unaware of their limitations in another. The person who reads widely about economics can wildly overestimate their ability to predict markets. The expert in one field can walk into a conversation about a different field and make the same mistakes as someone who knows nothing at all. The domain changes. The mechanism stays exactly the same, which means the real question is not whether you have ever been MacArthur Wheeler in a situation that mattered. The real question is which situation it was, and whether you ever found out. MacArthur Wheeler was sentenced and went to prison, but before he left, he reportedly kept returning to the same question, not how he had been caught. He understood that eventually. What he couldn't let go of was a simpler problem. He had been so sure. He had stood in front of a mirror before walking into those banks, looked at his own lemon-juiced face, and felt completely confident. No hesitation, no doubt, no small voice suggesting this might not work the way he thought it would. And that feeling, that absolute conviction, had been the most dangerous thing about him. Not the lemon juice, not the robbery, the certainty. The world is full of people who are that certain about things they don't understand. Most of them have never robbed a bank. They are just sitting in meetings, posting online, making decisions, offering opinions, voting, and managing people with the same quiet, unshakable confidence that MacArthur Wheeler had standing in front of his mirror. The lemon juice varies. The certainty doesn't. And the only thing that has ever reliably broken it is the uncomfortable, humbling, necessary process of actually learning something well enough to see how much further there is to go.